everybody. Welcome back to The Reason We Learn. I'm Deb Philman, mom, homeschooler, educator. So in this video, I'm going to show you some examples of pieces of evidence to back up the video I just posted about how kids are learning to read and how they're not learning to read properly because they're not being taught properly. This is a compilation of links put together by one of the moms from FAPE, and I'm forever grateful. I'm going to share this link in the description below so you can read these for yourself because I'm not going to be able to read all of them. As you can see, it's quite a long list. Okay, so I'm going to read all the titles to get you interested enough, hopefully, to go read them for yourself, and then I'm going to talk about some highlights. First, what the words say. A false assumption about what it takes to be a skilled reader has created deep inequalities among U.S. children, putting many on a difficult path in life. At a loss for words. What's wrong with how schools teach reading? For decades, schools have taught children the strategies of struggling readers using a theory about reading that cognitive scientists have repeatedly debunked. And many teachers and parents don't know there's anything wrong with it. I was, in fact, taught to teach reading this way. Thankfully, I instinctively knew it was a terrible idea, tried to not use it, and that was just one of the many criticisms I faced in my first year of teaching, and one of the reasons I stopped teaching in public schools. Hard words. Why aren't our kids being taught to read? Scientific research has shown how children learn to read and how they should be taught, but many educators don't know the science and in some cases actively resist it. As a result, millions of kids are being set up to fail. Hard to read. How American schools fail kids with dyslexia. There are proven ways to help people with dyslexia learn to read and a federal law that's supposed to ensure schools provide kids with help. But across the country, public schools are denying children proper treatment and often failing to identify them with dyslexia in the first place. The incentives are not aligned with figuring out they have a learning disability. Influential literacy expert Lucy Calkins is changing her views. She's the one who created the whole language method. That's what I was taught in graduate school, and that was what I thought was completely ridiculous. Let's see. In a major shift, the controversial figure in the fight over how to teach reading now says that beginning readers should focus on sounding out words, according to a document obtained by APM Reports. That's a new one. We were explicitly taught not to use phonics. Not just they don't work or you don't need to use them that much, but don't use them. Michigan reaches a settlement in a landmark right to literacy case. The governor won't contest a court ruling that found students have a constitutional right to learn to read and agrees to more funding for Detroit schools. Can you imagine? This is a Democrat. This is a person who's probably spending most of her time talking about we need more money, and she wouldn't fund the schools to support these learners. Is learning to read a constitutional right? A federal court recently ruled that underfunded schools in Detroit violated students' right to a basic education. Advocates hope the case is the beginning of a trend. And now think about adding critical race theory into this. You've got kids struggling to read. They're not being taught to read properly. Now you're going to inject ideas that are way above their cognitive ability, that deal with concepts they're not ready for, that are age inappropriate for a host of reasons having nothing to do with cognitive ability. They're just age inappropriate. And the time that's taken up by these lessons could otherwise be used to teach them to read, to implement their IEP plans, to diagnose them with their learning disabilities so they can get IEP plans, etc. Experts say widely used reading curriculum is failing kids. A first-of-its-kind review finds Lucy Calkins' materials don't align with the science of reading. For those of you who are wondering, the science of reading is over 50 years old. We've known for a very, very long time. And through exhaustive research, not just like one person's research, like multiple people have researched this and brought it all together. So you have like the best of the best practices that all come together to create, teaching methods that you could call the scientific method of teaching reading. And here we have schools, ironically, that refuse to open because whatever, they claim they're afraid. They're ignoring the science when it comes to disease, and they're also ignoring the science when it comes to teaching kids to read. Are you seeing a trend? They're not really interested in facts. They're not really interested in data. They're not really interested in any of the things that you would hope a school, an educational establishment, would be interested in. They're the ones turning around and teaching your children. Not interested in science, not interested in data, not interested in facts. And yet, educators. New salvos in the battles over reading instruction. Several powerful people and organizations have weighed in on the national conversation prompted by APM Report's podcast episodes. National assessment shows more K-12 students struggle to read. And this goes back to 2019. I mean, these go all the way back. Reading instruction, what to do if your child's school isn't teaching reading right. So what do you notice? You're going, this is, and somebody was like, well, that was the Trump administration. Oh, no, you could go back farther. Like, as I said, I graduated from grad school in 1990. They were pushing Lucy Calkins' ideas then. This goes way back. This has nothing to do with politics except insofar as the teachers union is a political organization. It's essentially a PAC. And its secondary purpose is to, create and keep jobs for teachers, for its members, because for every teaching job, for a union job, is more dues from which to draw the salaries of the union administrators. Catching on? See, if they were a corporation doing it, if they were a for-profit entity, we would immediately recognize the corruption. We would immediately recognize the self-serving nature of these organizations. But as they claim to care so very deeply about our children and about teaching, I guess we believe them. I don't know. The evidence doesn't back it up. So the incentives are not there to support the teaching of reading correctly. Not just the incentives of, accountability, that somebody's going to hold them accountable for not doing it, which you think there would. There's a law. It's their constitutional right to be taught to read. You have the IDEA that makes it mandatory to provide services to people who have a disability. You're starting to understand why they don't want to diagnose more people with a disability, because then they'd be obligated to service it, which would mean expending money, which would mean dealing with their budgets in such a way as to cut down on some of those six-figure salaries for the administrators and for, other things, whatever those might be. I don't know what they're spending their money on. Political activity, maybe? I don't know. The point is, people are paying taxes, expecting to get a service known as education. The primary component of that is teaching your child to read. Everything else flows from that. They're not doing it. And here are all the articles you can read. So, as I said, I'm not going to read them all to you, but this one is a case where the mom herself had a learning disability. She was trusting the school to educate her son. She had other children. They were doing fine. The one son was not doing fine, but she didn't know because they didn't tell her. They didn't tell her he was not doing fine. They told her she was A-okay until she switched to a charter school. The charter school said, your seventh grader is reading at a second grade level. This is Sonia. Okay, that's what they told her. So let's look at, is Sonia's son CJ alone? No, he's not. U.S. fourth graders reading levels over time. Okay, here we are 2019. As I said, this goes way, way back. Do you see improvements? No, it's gone down. There's a teeny little uptick here. But look at this. Down. I got out of grad school 2 years before here. Really not any improvement. Okay, so below basic, it's not improving. They're not even above half of these students reading at basic level. Okay? These are the kids below basic level. 36% below basic, 33% at basic, so not even half at basic, 24% proficient, 8% at advanced. That's over there. Then if we get to the most recent, we have 9% at advanced, 34% below basic, and so on. And this across racial lines. Now look, okay? Fourth graders, Black, American Indian, Alaska Native, Hispanic, White, Pacific Islander. These are the below basic, at proficient, and at advanced. Okay? So the Asian students, again, doing better. Now you might say, well, how does that? They're being taught the same way. No, they're not. Because their parents at home, I can assure you, are teaching them phonics. I know because I teach Chinese students. They're in China, but they put a huge emphasis on breaking the language down and teaching it phonetically. Maybe it's because our language is so fundamentally different from Chinese, and if they're raising these children to be bilingual, which is possible, they want to make sure they understand the alphabet and the letter sounds because it is so dramatically different from a language that is character-based. Who knows? Who knows the reason? But I know there's a difference. So they're getting extra instruction at home. There's no way they're getting it just from school. So that's what we learned from those statistics, okay? And you have word recognition, poor readers, language comprehension, good readers, poor readers. Look, they're stumped. They're stumped by the words. You cannot teach whole language and have these kids understand what's going on. Anyway, so that's just the first article. That's just the first one. The second one, what's wrong with how schools teach reading? This one goes into more information, percentage below basic level. Again, look, down, 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 down. Would be really fun to overlay this with a graph of money spent, because I can assure you the graph of money spent goes up like this. And the results. Anybody who tells you that these results are the function of not having enough money is lying through their teeth. They're either woefully ignorant and should not be speaking on the topic, or they're lying. There's no other explanation. There isn't. And then 12th graders proficient in reading. Look at this. We are below 40% U.S. 12th graders. This is 2015. Below half. It's just absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. So, they go back to like the old method of teaching, the McGuffey's reader, which worked, by the way. We had 99% literacy back in the day. So 3Qing is the horrible way to do it. The scientists are taking it on. Science is, there's a science to reading. This is the theory known as 3Qing. This is the bad one. It comes from the notion that readers use 3 different kinds of information or cues to identify words they're reading. The theory was first proposed in 1967. Notice how everything bad comes out of the 60s. When an education professor named Ken Goodman presented a paper at the annual meeting of the American Education Research Association in New York City. In the paper, he rejected the idea that reading is a precise process that involves exact or detailed perception of letters or words. Instead, he argued that as people read, they make predictions about the words on the page using these 3 cues. You really have to wonder if he was just having them on and they bought it. Graphic cues. What do the letters tell you about what the word might be? Think about how absurd that is on its face. For a small child. What do the letters tell you about what the word might be? Well, the letters don't tell you anything. They're just black squiggles. They're just black squiggles on a background until somebody teaches you that those letters represent sounds. They're meaningless. They certainly don't tell you anything about a word. Syntactic cues. What kind of word could it be? For example, a noun or a verb. You're so far into reading by the time you're able to make this kind of prediction. First of all, you have to know the parts of speech. If you don't know how language works, you can't even make this prediction. Semantic cues. What word would make sense here based on the context? Well, my goodness, I don't know what A sounds like. I couldn't possibly tell you. Skill in reading involves not greater precision, but more accurate first guesses. Not how people read. It just isn't. It's factually incorrect. This is somebody who made a bunch of crap up. It's kind of the reading equivalent of critical race theory to explain, in this case, this is to explain why people do something well. It's like this far away from a religious dogma. There's no science at all to back up what he's saying. And it was a theory. Somehow in the 60s, we got really enamored of theories. And we decided to take theories and implement them and use our children as science experiments. We didn't say, hey, let's test these theories out in a lab. Let's test these theories out some other kind of way. Let's have some, get some volunteers. Let's document it and hold accountable, the people who are implementing it to make sure it works. No, we just unleashed it. Yep. Reading is, they said, visual memory process. The whole word. It's a lie. And it's a lie so egregious when you consider that we knew what worked. It had worked. There was no reason to change it. So it's not like we had lagging literacy. It's not like we had problems with people learning to read. They had a highly literate population, even in the Black community. There wasn't a problem to solve. It's almost like somebody said, can you come up with a way to teach reading that involves less work? That we don't have to learn a bunch of science before we actually go out in the schools and do it. It'll be like quicker and easier. We can actually pretend we're teaching, but actually do nothing except stick books in front of them. Can you do that for us? Because that's basically what they came up with. So, but the other idea is that reading requires knowledge of the relationships between sounded letters. Yes! Children learn to read by sounding out words. This approach is known as phonics. It goes way back, popularized in the 1800s with the McGuffey readers. And they work. They work. These two ideas, the whole word and phonics, had been taking turns as the favored way to approach reading until Goodman came along with what came to be known among educators as the 3-cueing system. In the cueing theory of how reading works, when child comes to a word she doesn't know, the teacher encourages her to think of a word that makes sense and asks, does it look right? Does it sound right? Think how big your vocabulary has to be for this to work. What if you are growing up in a household that doesn't speak English? Think this might be a problem? What if you were growing up in a household where there aren't a whole lot of books, so your vocabulary is very limited? What if the people around you, your parents, had learning disabilities and they don't read very well, and so on and so forth? So anyway, that's that article. You can go and read that one. And so on. There are more. I'm not going to go into all of them. I just wanted to give you a taste of it. I'm going to include the link in the description. But I hope you come away from watching this video understanding that there is a science to learning to read. We have actively rejected it for the past, well, I don't know, probably 30 years. So think of how many people there are who have gone on to college and so forth at, barely 12th grade reading level, barely. Okay, not ready for college, definitely not ready to work in the outside world. And they were taught in the public schools. Whether or not this is done in private school, I cannot say, but I can tell you this is done in the public schools. And so there's a science, they're rejecting it. They're talking to you about systemic racism. They're talking to you about achievement gaps. They're telling you they need money to close the gaps. They're telling you that it's because of racist attitudes of teachers. And the only racist attitudes I can find are the people who know full well there's a science to teaching reading, and they are actively rejecting it, fighting it tooth and nail, even though reading is such a fundamental skill. We know it's crucial to success for the student and for the adult they become. So who's the racist? Who's the racist? The people who say, we don't want to fund this garbage anymore. We need school choice. We need to have the money follow the kid. Let the parents choose a school that will teach them the right way. Or the people insistent on keeping them in the system, prisoner, making it impossible for them to choose to leave, and refusing to use the science of reading instruction. You be the judge. I know where I'd fall on that decision. So I hope you've found this useful. And if you did, I hope you consider subscribing to the channel, like the video, share the video with people you know who might benefit from it. And that's the video.